So I wanted to kind of finish this video about childhood trauma and how it can be something that affects you for the rest of your life, and how to figure out a way to systematically kind of work yourself out of those entrained patterns or cycles that become part of you, part of your psyche. Because again, everything is about, well, everything that is associated or that helps you to anchor joy and happiness and peacefulness, it's so directly connected to safety and security and infrastructure within your own existence. And when you grow up as a child and you never feel safety and you never feel that you have that cushioning around you or that family unit, it is extremely fragmenting for one's aura, for one's soul, for one's beingness. I can relate to it because that's how I grew up. I grew up with the absolute dissolution of my entire family on both sides. There was no stability, there was no structure, there was no knowing, there was no love, in the sense of love was very transient. So sometimes an aunt or uncle would be present, maybe, and that would come in waves. Maybe they would disappear for 5-7 years, and then they would come in and there'd be this love, and then all of a sudden it wouldn't be there anymore because again, it wasn't a consistent. So again, for myself, it created within me a sort of an animalistic survival mechanism where I was always trying to figure out where was the safest path. Because again, unfortunately, with my childhood, there was a lot of unsafe things around in my environment as well. Very chaotic, unsafe individuals and circumstances, people. And as a child, that's freaky. I mean, that does something to you and the vision that you, or the way that you see the world. And it's sort of like putting on, because for me, and everybody's experience is going to be different, but for myself, I had a beautiful childhood for like the first couple of years of my life. So I did have some sort of semblance of what the magic of family and togetherness and just Christmas dinners and Thanksgiving dinners and family reunions and barbecues. I had that for like a little minute nanosecond when I was young, and then it's like some atomic bomb came into our lives and everything got destroyed, everything. And there was just no congruency, there was no stability, and that again gave rise to an extreme amount of anxiety and untetheredness within my being that was just pervasive. It gave rise to extreme anxiety. But there was nothing wrong with me, and this is what I've realized as I've grown up. There was absolutely nothing wrong with me. It was that what was giving me anxiety was the fact that there was no stability. So again, as I've gone through the sorting out of myself, and obviously the diligent task of creating infrastructure and systems within business, within my life, within really acclimating my own energy into an equilibrium, I've been able to reverse engineer what stability needs to look like. And that's where, again, there's all these different opportunities for learning and growth and depth, which are given to us in and of the human experience. And so what I was able to discern is that there was nothing about me that was mentally ill or broken or anything like that. There was brokenness, but because basically the brokenness, there was a a process in breaking it, then there's a process in putting it back together. So nothing is ever eternally broken. It's just a process of unlearning. So all of the behaviors that we gather, the patterns, the cycles that we gather along our path, you know, from childhood into adulthood, into all of the different, you know, complexities of trying to exist as an adult and trying to, you know, have everything looking like it's put together. Everything can be transformed. Everything can be reconfigured. And that's the beauty of this journey, is to remember that you are never stuck. Nothing is ever stagnant. And I think that that's one of the most troublesome thoughts that we can have, is that, you know, what if I stay like this forever? What if I, you know, can't get out of this depression? What if, you know, and again, that's that what if thinking, but what if my depression is so pervasive that I just spiral and, you know, continue destructive behaviors, and I have no mechanism or nobody to help pull me out. It's a lonely, cold, terrible world, and everything's superficial, and mostly people just care about themselves, and, you know, who's gonna come there to rescue me, all these different things. And what we have to remember, especially when we kind of start to move into a divine relationship, is, and what I mean by a divine relationship is a relationship with a higher power. So understanding that the universe, God, whatever you need to call it, because again, we have different creeds, different ideologies, different religions around the world, but they all speak to an underlying force and source that is protective of us, which is part of our creation. We are part of it. It is part of us. And when I started to remember this fact, when I started to realize that that creative force is protecting me at all times, and that everything is for learning, and then I could step back and realize, okay, what lessons do I wish to learn? What things serve me? And what patterning is detrimental and causing me massive amounts of mental or physical harm? And there needs to be a certain amount of discernment. You know, you have to be able to discern, but that's the mechanism of learning. And it's a lifelong process. It can be a turbulent process. It can be a gentle process. I'm in the stage of my life where I've had enough turbulence that I'm done with that. I'm apt and excited for gentle learning. That's it. That's where I'm at. So if it's non-chaotic, I'm interested in the process. And we all have the ability to put up our own boundaries in terms of that. This is Riley. And Riley lost her little sister last year, so she's getting used to that. She's dealing with her own cycles of loss, right? Yeah. So anyways, back to what I was saying about you know, your own patterning, and really understanding, creating the infrastructure of a whole, healthy, substantiated life. I was able to learn this, obviously not so much through my family dynamics, but through the mechanism of starting companies. So I was really, and what was so wonderful for me is that being, again, sort of the head of a household, or I guess the founder, president of a company or many companies, I had to realize that my behaviors were always going to be mirrored back to me through my employees. So if I had any toxicity in my nature, or if I was seeing things incorrectly, or jumping to conclusions, or coming from a place of trauma, I was going to be projecting that onto everything that I was doing, okay? And especially in the beginning, my view of the world, because it had been such an unsafe journey, like just such a tumultuous journey up until then, I also had, unfortunately, a mistrust of human beings, because I had never really experienced too many human beings that had my back, or weren't chaotic. You know, not that the people that were my family members were bad people. They just were chaotic. They didn't know who they were, and they weren't really capable of creating a proper structure for young kids, I guess is the best way to put it. And due to that fact, they also attracted a lot of kind of really chaotic people that just created a greater vortex of chaoticness. And what I realized about my own energy when I was starting these companies is that, I was projecting a lot of fear and distrust and my previous experiences with my life onto other individuals. And so I'm going to explain a little bit of what I mean by this. It's not that I was necessarily doing bad things. I was afraid that they were going to do bad things to me. And because I was so much in this lower vibrational thinking of fear, it would become a self-fulfilling prophecy because I could not entrust them with things. I had to micromanage, and I always had this feeling that they were going to hurt me in some way. And so again, it usually kind of happened that way. It would kind of almost out manifest. And if you understand and have watched some of the other videos I've done about manifestation, the law of attraction, our thought forms, what I started to realize is that everything I thought just manifested. Anytime I would think something was going to happen a certain way, it just kind of did. And it started to kind of floor me in a strange way. I was like, what? How come every time I think this, it happens this way? And then I got into the mindset of okay, well, what if I just thought different thoughts? Would it play out differently? And what I've also noticed is that if I have really positive thoughts, it actually plays out the positive way that I see the world. So it gives a lot of power to the individual if you can understand that your thoughts are magnetic. What you think becomes your reality. And that can be scary too, because it does put a lot of power in your own hands or in your own mind. And that can be scary. That can be scary because it's well, what if I don't have control of my dark thoughts? And what if those dark thoughts manifest? And I think that that is the exact lesson that we're here to learn, is that we have to control what we think about. What we think about is creation. Our imagination is creation. And I want to clarify this in terms of, I'm not saying our imagination is above a divine power. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying that our imagination is paired with divinity in terms of that universal creative force. God is in us and we are in him. And I guess, again, that masculine term of him. Again, I don't subscribe to the ideology that God is a man or a woman. I believe that creation in a dualistic universe is both. It's mother and father in unison, because that's truly the only principle to my mind that can make perfect balanced sense. Again, we've lived in a very patriarchal world, and it's unbalanced, where men have all the power and they can abuse women, and they can have multiple wives, and they can do whatever they want, and it leads to massive amounts of toxicity and abuse. I mean, it is what it is. I'm going to do a video about just some of the things over the millennia that women have endured. I mean, they're horrific, and they've been allowed, and it's strange ideology. So it's distortion of our mental capacity that allows a mind to even go into some of these strange things that have happened throughout history. But I think it's important to look at historical events and also say what we don't want to repeat, right? We don't have to repeat these patterns. And this is so much what I learned in my own journey, that there may be circumstances within families, there may be ideologies, there may be ways of being, traditions, superstitions, but they don't necessarily have to exist. I mean, you can break that generational curse just because your father and your grandfather and your great-grandfather were alcoholics doesn't mean you have to be. Or, you know, just because there was pervasive sexual child abuse in your family doesn't mean you have to extend that. You know, I know for myself, that's a reality that I had to grow up with, knowing that there was a lot of child predators in a certain part of my family. That was horrible. That was a horrible reality to realize. And just the level of abuse that I realized happened within my family. I mean, some of the things like my great-grandmother being dragged behind a truck by her ankles on a gravel road because she didn't obey my grandfather or my great-grandfather, you know, she burnt biscuits. Like, this is a beautiful lady that I grew up with, my great-grandma, but just knowing some of the things she went through. I mean, she burnt some biscuits and my great-grandfather put her hand on the stove and burnt it because she accidentally, for 2 seconds, looked away from the stove. I mean, just, I can't, the stories, the things that I have realized within my own genealogy, it's like so traumatic. It's so mind-bending that human beings could even do some of these things. And by keeping that kind of behavior in the shadows, it's what keeps the system broken. It's what keeps the patterns repeating. And it's when we use our voice to talk about some of these things, to talk about our experiences, that we move on from it. We lose the fear, because when you utilize your voice and say, this happened to me, or I experienced this, or this was wrong, it forces it into the light. And then it forces individuals that may have been manifesting those types of behaviors to look at themselves, to really be in the light, because it's generally negative things are done in the darkness, you know. Negative things, that's sort of a weird way of putting it. I've got a meeting coming up, so I'm trying to speed through this, but you know, things that are done in the darkness stay there because it's like it's protected. It's, you know, people aren't going to find out about it. It's secret, but it's like these secret toxicities. But when we open those things, open those doors to the light, we become free, because we're showing that the thing that existed in the darkness is not congruent with the highest order of being, and we are not going to accept it. And luckily, we're at a stage in our human evolution where women can finally stand up and say, this is not right, this is incorrect, and I shouldn't be treated this way.